recording.
1 second. I think we're good.
I got the pricing now, and I can say that the pricing is actually much more higher right now.
Oh, really? Yeah.
For double occupancy, pricing is 2,138. The price that we have is 2,164.
Oh.
Okay, sorry about that. If someone wants to tell me what they think when I say gut, or if you hear the word gut, what are we talking about? Digestive system. So you think about the whole digestive system. Any other point of views? The digestive systems, right? Yeah. So that's basically what it is. It's the digestive system. A lot of times people think of the lower digestive system, but here's the unique thing about the digestive system. Okay, no problem. Our digestive system is one big long tube, right? It starts from the beginning from our mouth and it ends up at the back end, right? And what is sometimes known as a donut analogy, right? If you think about it, it's the only part in our body that's actually open to the outside. Does that make sense? Right? So if you think of a donut, the middle, the hole is actually our digestive system. It's one long tube. It goes from the mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestine, it's all convoluted at the bottom, but if you stretch it out, it's one long tube that actually has the entrance point at the mouth and exit point at the anus, right? So that's what our digestive system is. So when we talk about the gut, that's what we're talking about, right? And there's 4 different things I kind of want you to understand about the gut, and it will start making more sense why inflammation in the gut is so important and why it's so important to control that, right? I don't know what that noise is. Do you want to ask the librarian if it's something that needs to be, or is it just going to go away by itself? Okay, so that's an important point to understand, because when we talk about some of the strategies for healing the gut, right, it will make sense that whatever happens at the beginning of the mouth will have an impact of what happens at the end, because it's one long tube, right? So what starts at the beginning will have an impact at the end. So you can't just sort of swallow your food and think it's going to be okay, because what's happening in the mouth is going to affect what happens in the large intestines. Okay, so that's why this is a really important concept to understand. And I'm glad everybody understood the donut analogy, because I wasn't sure if you can actually picture how we actually, it's the outside world inside of us because it's open, right? Okay, the other part that's really, really important, and I would say it's the crux of this presentation, is the human microbiome. Is this a new concept? Because it may be a new concept for a lot of people. And so this will require a bit of understanding. So here's the thing, right? And I think I've sort of alluded to it in a few of my previous presentations about how we have bacteria living inside of us, on top of us as well, but there is an ecosystem. There's like trillions of living organisms, most of them bacteria, but they also have viruses and fungi that are actually living inside of us. And there's the largest place where they exist is in the large colon or the intestines, okay? So now, a lot of us, this is information that was in the last 20 years, I would say. I think when I finished nutrition about 12, 13 years ago, I'd gone to a conference in Vegas, and there were clinicians, doctors, real research going on in this field. Tons of research now, still more ongoing, right? For those of you, you may remember before 20 years, we saw bacteria as bad, right? Bacteria can still be bad, but we didn't have this concept of good bacteria. These are resident bacteria. They live in us. They are rent-free. However, they do give us a lot of benefits, right? So it's what's called a symbiotic relationship relationship. Yes, they live inside of us. That's their sort of, we give them residence. We allow them to stay, don't ask them for rent, but they give us a lot back in return. And they're still studying so many things that are coming through in terms of how much impact they have on our health, right? And the great thing about this, well, it's good and bad, is the fact that they're greatly influenced by environment, right? Which is great because that means that this is, because when we talk about these in these workshops, our key is to figure out what we have control over, right? We have control over our microbiome, right? Yes, we can also damage it, but we can also improve it, okay? So that's the point of putting that is greatly influenced by environment. So let's talk about what are the functions of the human microbiome, right? Now there's lots of functions. I haven't listed all of them, and they're finding more and more all the time. It actually,
You try to comfort me.
It helps us digest food, okay? It actually produces vitamins, hormones like vitamin K2, vitamin B, and even neurotransmitters, these chemicals that our brain uses, to function. They're actually made by, some of them are made by these bacteria that live in our gut. And that's why we're not going to bring that up right now, but there is a concept of the gut-brain axis. I don't know if you've heard about it, how the gut affects our brain, right? So again, that's another topic for another day, but these guys produce that stuff. They also, they regulate our immune system. What does that mean? That means that they actually help the immune system recognize what is good and what is bad. Now, if you go back to the few workshops ago, we talked about how inflammation is caused by the immune system when it detects something that's dangerous, right? So it launches an attack, and the attack is through the immune system, through the inflammation, process of inflammation. These little critters that live inside of us actually work very closely with the immune system to make sure it's doing the job correctly. So you can see how important they are, right? They also produce metabolites, which just means like chemicals that can impact our bodies, right? So for example, some of them will produce anti-inflammatory chemicals. However, some of the bad bacteria, and if you have too many of them, will produce inflammatory chemicals. So you can understand they can actually really have an impact on our body. They also provide fuel for our cells. They actually, and I don't know if some of you have heard about short-chain fatty acids. These are something that are produced by these bacteria, and they actually help our cells in the intestines. If we don't have enough of them, the cells in the intestines can't grow, can't do their function, right? The other thing they can do is they actually also, now these good bacteria prevent the bad bacteria from taking residence, right? They're pretty territorial. So once you've given them rent-free space, they're gonna make sure that the bad bacteria don't take up space. As long as we have enough good bacteria, it will keep the bad bacteria at bay. They also help you detox harmful chemicals, pesticides, all these kind of chemicals that sometimes come in processed foods. These gut bacteria have been studied that be shown to help detox those chemicals. So you can imagine the amount of work they do. There's trillions of them and all of them doing different stuff, right? But they have a really important role to play. Is this making sense? Is there questions? Because this is a really important concept, and if it's new, then this is something that you may need a bit of time to digest. How important these resident bacteria are for us. And these are the good bacteria. Do you have a question? Okay, so we'll talk about how do you know if there's something off, right? Because usually what they say is if you have 80% good bacteria, you're good, right? But the balance, it's all about the balance, right? The body is always about the balance. You can have a little bit of the bad, as long as the good is there, we're good. But as long as that shifts, that's when problem, and a lot of times it's symptoms. We can tell by our symptoms that there's something is off in the gut, okay? So are we good with this? I can continue? Yeah, okay. Okay. So we understood the two concepts about the gut. It's long tube and the human microbiome, all these critters that live inside of us, right? The third thing that's important, and you may have heard this from me before as well, is that 70% of our immune system is in the gut. Okay. Now remember, the immune system is like our military. It's like these soldiers that protect us from harm. Every time we get injured, every time we get attacked by another, harmful things like harmful bacteria or viruses, it's our immune system that gears up in action and makes sure it's taken care of, right? Very complicated system, but all we need to understand about the immune system, that's the system that is there to protect us from harm, okay? Here's the interesting thing. Our gut microbiome, those good bacteria, they guide the immune system and they regulate it. Makes sense because they almost program the immune system to know not to kill the good bacteria. Because remember, they're still bacteria, right? But they're resident good bacteria. So they want the immune system to know that we're not the enemy and we'll tell you who is the enemy, right? That's why this regulation of the immune system is really important. And that's probably the reason why when we don't have enough good gut bacteria, the immune system gets dysregulated, right? That means it's not functioning at its optimum. And when, of course, it doesn't function at its optimum, all kinds of diseases can brew, okay? So that's number 3. And the last thing that I want you guys to understand about the gut, actually, no, I just talked about this. The reason why, the reason why 70% of the immune system is in the gut is because, like I said, it's that part inside of us. The gut is that only part inside of us that's exposed to the outside, right? Outside, anything we ingest in, even the water we drink, the air we breathe, may breathe in through the mouth, it is, we're surrounded by these stuff, right? So our gut is exposed to all kinds of outside things. And that's why 70% of the immune system is in the gut, because it has to protect us from all these toxins that are coming in. So it makes sense why it's focused there, okay? The last thing, again, which is also very important to understand, is the lining of the gut. Okay, so it's a tube, right? There's a whole, it's a barrier. So if you can think of it's a barrier that separates whatever is coming in from the rest of the body, right? The role of the gut is to make sure when the food comes in, it breaks it up into what needs to be the smallest possible. And then that piece needs to get inside our body because we need the nutrients, right? We get our nutrients from our food. So when we ingest like, say a steak, right? The body is going to break it down so that into smaller pieces, the smallest pieces, amino acids, then get absorbed. We take in, say, a piece of bread. The body is going to break it down into small, like glucose molecules, which are then taken in, right? So the function of the digestive system is to break down that food so we can absorb it. So that lining, that barrier between the gut and our body, right? Is that making sense? The barrier between the gut and the body has to be very tightly controlled. And the reason for that is you don't want the crap that's coming in to go inside. You don't want any of those bad bacteria that may have ingested to go inside. You don't want any of the chemicals that may have come in that really are foreign to the body to get inside. But you do want the nutrients, the stuff that our body needs to get inside, right? So it's very tightly controlled. There's a whole mechanism for that, but we don't need to understand. What we need to know is that on top of the cells, right, that the boundary, there is a line of these blue things are there. They represent the good bacteria. So the good bacteria almost form like a line of soldiers that protect the lining of the gut. And the lining of the gut is quite thin. It's only one cell. Some of our linings for other things are thicker, but this is a very thin lining because, again, it needs to take in stuff, but it also needs to protect you from chemicals and bad stuff. So this good bacteria actually are protecting the lining of the stomach as well, okay? So they're doing a whole bunch of stuff, right? So it makes sense to think that if we do things that disrupt this microbiome, if we kill off this good bacteria, if we kick them out, because we think they're red-free, whatever happens, like, I mean, there's lots of things we can do to kind of destroy, right? And our lifestyle often destroys how we, these good bacteria. You can imagine how much functioning we lose, right? Because we talked about they help you digest food, they make vitamins, they protect your gut lining, they do all kinds of these things. If they go down in number, what do you think is going to happen, right? We're going to start losing that function, right? So it's really, and that's where it all lies. That's the key to understanding the inflammation is in the gut. That's caused by what is called as gut disbiosis. Now that's a big term. We'll explain that, right? If you guys understand, is everybody clear on the function of this good bacteria or the gut microbiome, right? It's a whole lot of cells. It's a whole lot of bacteria, right? The good bacteria, and they're there to protect us, to help us digest food, do all kinds of stuff. They are good for us. They are our friends. When they go down in number, we're in trouble because that's when this term is coined as gut dysbiosis. So let's talk a little bit about gut dysbiosis. Okay, so again, there's a lot of research in this area, right? When you have a change in the composition of this resident bacteria, right, relative to what's found in healthy individuals. So this is what they know so far. Now, our gut bacteria, we don't all have the same good bacteria, okay? It's kind of like the lines on your hands, right? They're not the same, but they're similar. Everybody has a different gut microbiome, right? People living here will have a different microbiome than somebody up in the country. People living here than somebody maybe in the continent of Africa, right? Everybody has a different gut microbiome. They still don't know what is considered a healthy microbiome. They don't know because there's so many healthy microbiomes. There's so many healthy combination of good bacteria. They do know, however, that when you have a disease, for example, this was my first sort of deep dive into these, is because when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, I started reading about it, and I found that there's a specific bacteria. What they found is everybody who has rheumatoid arthritis has this specific bacteria in high number, which is not found in people who don't have this disease. So they know that this specific bacteria is associated with people who have this disease. They found that with obesity. They found that with some other illnesses, right? So they know what is associated with a disease state, but they don't know what is the perfect microbiome, because if they did, we could create a probiotic with the perfect microbiome and everybody would be perfect, because everybody has a microbiome that's beneficial to them. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so what can cause gut dysbiosis? Lots of things can cause dysbiosis, but what happens when you have dysbiosis is either you lose the good bacteria. So something, for example, if you smoke, that is going to reduce the good bacteria. Stress definitely will reduce your good bacteria, right? A diet and refined sort of processed foods will reduce your gut bacteria, good gut bacteria, right? So that can happen. You can have an overgrowth of harmful bacteria, right? Again, that kind of goes together because remember, the good bacteria are actually, like I said, they're territorial. They will prevent the bad bacteria from growing because they'll eat up all the good foods. The bad bacteria will have nothing to eat, right? But if they don't have enough of the good bacteria, the bad bacteria will start, their numbers will start increasing. Remember, it's an ecosystem that happens out there in the world as well, right? If you kill off one species, the other species will start growing in higher numbers, right? Exact same thing happens. The third thing, which is really interesting, is diversity of organisms is important, right? Just like if you look at like apples, for example, there's different kinds of apples. There's Macintosh, there's Gala, there's, I don't know, name me another one. You know, there's different types of apples. Same with tomatoes, there's different varieties. Same with these organisms. Diversity is always good, whether it's humans, whether it's plants, whether it's gut bacteria, right? Diversity, because different bacteria do different things. So it's not like you need 1 or 2 or 3 different types of bacteria. You need, they almost like 1,000 different types of bacteria exist within us. Okay, so these are the 3 different ways we can reach that state of dysbiosis. We don't have enough of the good bacteria, we have too many of the bad bacteria, or we don't have enough species of the bacteria. Like the diversity goes away. Okay, and when we end up, and there's a reference I have if you want to read more about it. So when we reach gut dysbiosis, number 1 thing that's very harmful for us when this happens is our immune system does not function as well as it should. And that's why they've done studies that when you improve your gut microbiome, it actually helps you, it helps with the immune system, right? When the immune system, a lot of autoimmune conditions kind of trace their sort of root to gut. Why? Because autoimmune conditions are because of the immune system not working properly, right? Autoimmune happens when our immune system starts attacking our own cells, which it's not supposed to do. It's supposed to attack foreign cells. That's because the immune system is not thinking properly anymore. It's dysregulated because of that imbalance in the gut microbiome, okay? Remember the good bacteria covering the lining of the stomach, of the intestines? Well, if you don't have enough of them, you're gonna get pieces where it's not being protected. So it impacts the lining of the gut. You guys may have heard of leaky gut syndrome or intestinal permeability. That's more of the, I guess, the scientific term. When you have gut dysbiosis, that leads to that, right? And so a lot of, I mean, you can talk about a whole bunch of conditions they'll talk about, maybe it starts because when the lining is not strong enough, it's not controlled well, you can end up with, and if your digestion is not good, you can end up with undigested food getting into our body, right? When it's not supposed to. So the body will look at it and say, oh, this is not supposed to be here. It's gonna mount an attack on it, right? And how does it mount an attack? Through inflammation. Is that starting to make sense? These bacteria, the minute that we lose the good bacteria, our immune system isn't working well, the lining of the gut gets affected. And the other thing it does is the metabolize the beneficial ones that were coming from the good bacteria. Now they're not coming, and these bad bacteria are producing stuff that are harmful to us. They in fact start producing these pro-inflammatory chemicals, which cause more inflammation. So it's like a whole bunch of things are all leading us towards inflammation, right? And that's why this, like remember we started off with the question, what is the connection? What is the connection between the gut and inflammation? That's the connection. Dysbiosis, us losing that balance of good bacteria versus the bad bacteria. We're just getting either too many of the bad bacteria or we're losing that diversity of bacteria. And that's causing this gut dysbiosis, which is then causing a cascade of events that leads us to inflammation. Does that make sense? Everybody seems confused. A whole bunch of stuff. There's so much, like I said, and that's I think that's the next slide. But I just want you guys to understand because this quite novel, I think. I don't know if you guys have heard this before. Oh, so some of you have heard this before, so that's good. But it's important to really make that connection. I mean, I think once you know what's happening, it's a lot easier to implement the changes. When I tell you, well, stress is going to kill off your good bacteria, it makes sense for you to say, okay, I got to work on my stress, right? So there's a lot of stuff that can kill off these good bacteria, but what I really want to focus on is what can we do? I don't like to focus on don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, because then you guys are gonna be like, well, forget it. I'm not gonna do anything, right? It's very important to understand what we can do, right? And of course, stress is a huge one, and we had a whole discussion on stress. And the reason why it's important, because, you know, and I'm part of this group of nutritionists, we talk about some of the clients, right? They will work on their gut. They'll be very careful about the foods they eat, the probiotics, all the stuff they're doing, juicing, all that stuff. But they're so stressed out about it, and they're not really working on the stressors in their life, they cannot heal. Because the stress, because of the mind-gut connection, we didn't even talk about how there's a nervous system, and the gut is actually known as the second brain, right? Because of that connection, when you have a lot of stress hormones, they're going to keep killing off the good bacteria no matter what you do. right? So the gut piece and the mind piece have to always go together when you're trying to heal, okay? You talked about the diet, diversify the diet, right? Of course, we know, again, fiber-rich foods. So when we talked about, last time we talked about foods, we talked about fiber-rich foods. So a lot of times it's all connected, right? Holistic medicine, everything is connected. Fiber-rich foods give the food that we can't digest the fiber, but the gut bacteria can. And when that's their food. When they eat that food, remember I talked about the short chain fatty acids, that's almost like a byproduct of the gut bacteria eating the fiber-rich foods and creating those chemicals which are actually anti-inflammatory, right? So when we give the stuff that our bacteria like to feed on, they thrive in numbers. We get lots more of the gut. And they've actually done studies. They found that, you know, people who are eating a very carnivorous diet, they add more plants in. Within a week, their gut microbiome changes. So it's very like, there's a lot of control we have on this, right? And that's a good thing. So yes, diet is an important factor. Again, increasing those fiber-rich foods and decreasing the sugar-rich foods. And this is a real, I'll give you my own case with that. This is real, right? Because I don't know, I may have told you the story before, but when I was sick, you know, all parts of my body used to hurt. My shoulders were really bad. And when I saw my functional medicine doctor, the first thing he said to me, listen, when we're going to work on your gut, you got to give up sugar. And I said, but I'm not eating that much. He goes, but you're still eating, right? So you need to take it all out. And I'm like, oh, how am I going to do this, right? But I said I had to, so I did. Within 5 days, the shoulder pain used to be so bad that every time I would turn in the middle of the night, I would like scream. And I had two like those hot blankets on each side. I'd put it on and then I would turn. That's how, within 5 days of giving up sugar, my pain went away. I was sold. I'm like, I can stay without sugar forever, right? But that was initially when I was working on my gut. Of course, when the gut is, I had to work a lot on my stress piece, right? So when my gut got balanced, I can eat sugar. But if I overeat it, I will notice that. I will notice my body getting inflamed, right? So the effect is quite profound with these things. Diversified diet means having different kinds, just like the diverse, because different bacteria feed on different foods, different fiber from different foods, right? So the more variety you add into your diet in terms of your fruits and vegetables, the more diversity you will get in your gut microbiome, right? Intermittent fasting, also one other thing is that just means basically that you have a big gap of time where you're not eating. That could be at night. For example, you stop eating at 6 at night or supper whenever you have that. And in the morning, let's say you eat at like 8 or 9, right? That gives you solid 14, 15 hours of fasting where there's no food going into the gut. And what the research has shown that when there is that period, the gut microbiome is balanced, right? You get a lot more of that growth of the good bacteria, okay? Exercise also helps. Again, not over-exercising because that will inflame you, but moderate exercise has been shown to improve your gut microbiome. What I do want to focus on, because we can talk about all kinds of things with this, but I don't want to leave you with so much that it's confusing. What I want to talk about is optimizing our digestion, because I always say that it's not just what you eat, but how you eat. Because remember, I talked about how it's all connected. What you do at the beginning of your digestion is going to have an impact at the end. Colon is where most of the gut microbiome is, right? If we are not chewing our food properly, if we're eating mindlessly, all that is going to affect our digestion. And when you optimize your digestion, you're going to optimize that gut microbiome. Okay, so my last slide is really just, I did want to leave a bit of time so we have questions. Is really about steps. I think it says steps to good digestion. That's what it says at the top, right? This is something I give to all my clients. I have a long list of steps to good digestion before we start on any of their diet changes. We are working on their gut. That's what I first tell them. Steps to good digestion. And really, it's the simple things in the life that make the big difference. Because you would think, well, what's the big deal about chewing? Because our digestion begins in the mouth, right? If you don't chew your food properly, number one, it puts a big load on the digestion further down, because now you have to have a lot more enzymes to digest it. And if you can't produce a lot of those enzymes, then you have undigested food. If you have undigested food, the bad bacteria start eating on them, and that creates a lot more gas and all kinds of things happen, okay? Chewing is very important because digestion begins in the mouth. But before that, digestion actually begins more before chewing. It actually begins here, right? Because that's why if you smell your food, if you kind of like do a lot of us have now become used to eating on the go. And I did too before I learned about this. And I'm like, now I sit down and eat properly, unless of course I'm in a rush. But most of the time I make time out. But it's very common for people to be eating and being on their phone, eating and working on the computer, right? Because we're like, well, eating is just eating. We don't pay attention, but it's huge because when the mind knows food's coming, it sends a signal through that gut-brain connection to the gut saying, okay, start producing the enzymes, get ready, food's coming. So before even chewing, it's our head, right? So that's why mindful eating, avoid eating on the go, even taking those 3 deep breaths, especially if you've had a stressful day. Don't eat when you're stressed because you're not going to digest, right? I didn't eat my dinner before I came. So 3 deep breaths allows you, again, we talked about deep breaths and how it activates the vagus nerve, and that actually puts your body into the rest and digest mode, the parasympathetic, right? That's when the body digests, that's when you relax. So taking just 3 deep breaths, that's why our ancestors had the wisdom of actually reciting a prayers. They were slowing down, they weren't just eating on the go. There was wisdom to that, right? Eat slowly, very important, eat slowly. Eat smaller, there's a typo there, sorry about that, more frequent meals, and avoid overeating, right? Because again, if you have a lot of food, you don't have enough digestive enzymes or acid to digest it, it's just gonna sit there for these microbiomes to kind of ferment, and all kinds of chaos are gonna happen. Avoid drinking with meals. That's always hard for people. And I don't mean small sips, you can have that, but don't have a full glass, especially caffeinated drinks. I know we love our coffee with a meal, but it's usually better if you want to improve your digestion. Now, you may not have any digestive issues, you can do that, but it would be very helpful if you were to do it separately from your meal, because drinking with your meals will dilute your enzymes and they don't work as effectively. And when the enzymes don't work as effectively, your digestion is affected, right? Consuming salads of fermented vegetables. Again, these guys have, fermented vegetables will give you the probiotics, right? A lot of the raw vegetables will give you the enzymes that helps with digestion. Lots of things you can do, even there's digestive enzymes, but again, I'm not talking about any of the supplements. This is really just about lifestyle, right? You can use digestive aids like lemon juice, apple cider, mix it with water, right? Even ginger is helping. So if there is digestive issues, these are the things you can add in. If you don't, just focus on the main ones where you slow down to eat, chew your food, take deep breaths. You don't necessarily have to go down to the last one, but this is just if you have any digestive issues. I've had people just doing this and they're like, oh, I feel so much better. I don't need to go in further. Right? So as simple as it sounds, it's powerful. Optimizing your digestion, we're going to rebalance your gut microbiome. That's the first step. Before you go into any probiotics, any of that stuff, you got to work on the digestion, right? So, and I felt this was important to bring it up because I don't think we've ever talked about this, right? And it's the simplest thing sometimes that you really don't talk about. I'm like, oh, this is so important. So now I think there was a question you had asked about how do you know if your gut is imbalanced, right? So when you have, for example, when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, well, a lot of autoimmune conditions start off in the gut. So I knew that my gut has to be done, right? But a lot of us I found, and at least I hear that from my clients, that, they may have not very good digestion. If they're constipated, they're going every 3 days. Now the medical community, right? This is how it's taught, that they're not really too concerned, right? That's your normal to go every 3 days. But as far as the digestion is concerned, that's not normal. You should be going at least once a day. If you go after every meal, you have a great digestion, but you should be going at least once a day, right? So if you're having issues with that, like constipation, don't ignore that. That needs to be addressed. Sometimes people have loose stools and they're like, oh, sometimes I have clients who had diarrhea for months and they're like, oh, I didn't think that was important. But that's important, right? I've had, people who get diarrhea for a long period of time and they end up with other things, right? So we often tend to neglect these symptoms, even acid reflux, right? That's also a reflection that something is off in your gut. Any of the gut-related symptoms are usually, I will tell you, for me, for example, as a child, I used to always have stomachache. I used to be constipated all the time. That was just, but that people thought that was just a norm. So it makes sense that when I ended up with the rheumatoid arthritis, well, it was in the works, right? There was a lot of things happening, but I didn't pay attention. So I think oftentimes we tend to do that because we don't recognize, and again, this information is very new. It will take years before it becomes part of the clinical medical practice, right? But some of this wisdom, like, in the flyer that I had, we talked about how Hippocrates was the one who said every disease begins in the gut, right? He's a founder of modern medicine. Now we're beginning to find all this evidence. Even many of the ancient, healing modalities like Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, they all talk about the gut, right? There's real wisdom to just, eating a certain way, not just what you eat, but how you eat as well, and really looking after our gut, because that really is at the root of a lot of these, chronic conditions that are developing. But of course, now there's a lot of research going on, and it will be going on for another decade or so. I think that's all. Yeah, again, like I mentioned, I think, just to understand, if you can just take from here the fact and the awareness that gut microbiome, these little critters that live inside of us, are really an intricate part of us. In fact, I was reading somewhere, they're saying that we have more bacteria than human cells. So we're more bacteria than human, which is kind of really sounds interesting because there's so many of them. And in fact, because they're producing things, so it's massive, like this awareness that they're an intricate part of us, and we need to look after a good bacteria because they really protect us from harm, right? So, again, we didn't talk about a lot of stuff because it'll be too overwhelming, but this is something we may even come back to. We'll talk about with the gut-brain axis, right? How our gut can impact how our brain is feeling. Yeah.
So what you said about optimizing digestion,
Mm-hmm.
if you follow those steps, then that encourages the growth of the bacteria.
Yes.
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 And even if you have had a lot of bad bacteria, if you follow the optimum digestion plan, then it will encourage your good vitamin.
Yes. It will encourage it. And then again, we look at the symptoms. So usually we can tell by the symptoms. It may not be enough, but it's definitely the first step. You may need to do something to get rid of the bad bacteria. You may need to supplement with probiotics, right? Again, short term, none of this is going to be, because the long-term goal is always to use our diet to encourage our good bacteria to keep thriving, right? And encourage our lifestyle. Again, this is always the first step. Then we work from there. And then if you're under a lot of stress, well, we're going to have to work on that, right? Because that's going to you're going to be increasing the good bacteria by optimizing your digestion, but stress is going to kill the good bacteria. So it's going to be like a cycle. So it's a process. And again, it's different for everyone because it depends on what is really impacting your gut. But that's the first step, because a lot of us aren't doing that, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is this one reason why doctors sometimes are reluctant to prescribe penicillin? A lot of times they come in and they say, well, we're not sure, we don't want to give you it because they'll not only maybe kill all these good bacteria.
Yeah, that's one reason, and the other is because of the resistance, right? If you keep using it, then the bacteria, like there's a big problem with developing resistance, that because they change their genetic makeup so that they cannot get affected by the bacteria, won't get affected by the drug. So two of the reasons. One, the fact that if you don't need to kill off this good bacteria, why take the antibiotic? And then number two is if you take it when you don't need it, you're going to create more resistant bugs. So yeah. So Metamucil is just fiber, right? Are you taking Metamucil to prevent constipation, or what's the reason for that? For vagal bowel movements? Yeah, if it's helping you, yes. There's different, sometimes people take it, doesn't help them, but it's just fiber. So yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. It's fine to take it. Just make sure you take it with water. Like good. If you're taking it at night, I don't know if that impacts, because I don't know if you can drink that much water, but yeah, that's not a problem.
So what is the root cause of indigestion and acid reflux, which
Yeah, there could be lots of reasons, but oftentimes we neglect gut dysbiosis. It could be an imbalance in your gut that's causing that as well, right? So again, the treatment from a conventional medical perspective is to take the medications that will suppress the acid production, right? Because what is happening is the acid is moving up into the esophagus and it's causing the issue, right? Now, suppressing acid production long-term is not helpful. And in fact, now they've also, even doctors have recognized that those drugs are supposed to be short-term, right? To support you, to help you, and then start working. So this discussion of balancing your gut bacteria doesn't often come up in like conventional medical talks, right? Again, like I said, it will take years for this information to reach. Gastroenterologists are more the specialists, they're more in tune with that, but you wouldn't see this information. So reflux, lots of reasons can be, but this is also one of the reasons, if your gut microbiome is not balanced, if you have too many of the bad bacteria. Because they're producing things that are damaging the lining, and then the body's producing more acid, and then it's kind of moving up, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna stop the recording so that